Greetings and welcome. Jonathan Foust here, and I will be leading the following introduction and meditation. And then we are going to have an interview, which I did recently with the wonderful Rachel Krantz. Tara and I are on a home retreat this week. So we are laying low, practicing, and hopefully going deep and churning up all kinds of great insights into the nature of reality. I'll check in with you in a little bit as to whatever comes out through that. Also, to let you know, I am doing a day-long retreat, Embodied Presence, on December 3rd. It's all about going inward through movement, through breath, through body scan meditations, including a lying down body scan meditation, which priceless. So all of that is available through my site and all that good stuff. So just to jump in real quick, first of all, none of this would happen without your support. All this is offered freely. There's no charge for any of these offerings. Generosity is what fuels this whole thing here. So thank you. Second, thank you to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo, our producers. Thank you to our mindful movement leader, to Rita Moran, mindful dialogue leaders, Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy. The whole Monday night experience, starting at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, mindful movement with Rita. Then this. And then afterward, around 8:35 or so Eastern Standard, you can join with Ray and Tara for Mindful Dialogue, an opportunity just to connect with good, nice, kind, liberation-oriented people. All those links are on my website, so feel free to take part. Alrighty, so let's dive in, and I will give a little introduction to this interview, but it's about working with future thinking. When you're ready, you can close your eyes. And you might like to take a few minutes just to let your body sway a little bit from side to side. Find a place where you start to feel comfortable, where you kind of feel aligned inside. You might want to roll your shoulders, let your head float a little bit from side to side. Of course, the antidote to future thinking is present moment attention. So I'm going to suggest we do a little bit of concentration practice. One of the most effective ways to do this is with your breath. And coherent breathing is a scientifically proven way to change your state really just in a few minutes. So what you might start to do with your eyes closed is slow down and deepen your breath. And you might notice how just shifting your attention to the breath moves you from what Dr. Huberman calls the extrinsic world, the outer world, to the intrinsic, to the inner world. And notice now, can you slow down your breath even more? And now, if you're drawn, we're going to take the next few minutes for what's called coherent breathing, which is lengthening the in-breath to the count of 4 or 5, and equally matching the out-breath to the count of 4 or 5. So you're matching the length of the inhalation with the length of the exhalation, slow, full, and deep. When your mind wanders, bring it right back. In breath to the count of 4 or 5. Exhale to the count of 4 or 5. Can you feel the impact after just a minute? You may find the more you relax, the more you might even lengthen the breath a little bit, maybe breathing in and exhaling to the count of 5 or 6. No, don't strain. Find that balance, getting more and more absorbed into the experience of the breath inside. You might explore now. If it feels right for you, you might like to continue, or you might now like to let the control of the breath drop away and let your breath be free-flowing and effortless, but with that same quality of attention to the breath. It's not so critical that you keep the attention on the breath. It's the refocusing. It's the coming back that develops this inner muscle of focus. You might want to shift your anchor, if you like, to maybe sounds or the feeling in the palms of the hands. Letting your anchor be your primary point of attention. When the mind goes into the future or reviewing the past, no judgment, just gently sense if you can let it go, like letting a balloon go. Coming back to the experience of your anchor. You might explore now what it's like to have your anchor as sort of the center of the target, but also to be aware of the periphery. That is to say, maybe the background or the awareness of what's changing, and even the awareness of who you are as the meditator. Shifting from concentration to this quality of mindfulness, the quality of awareness itself. You might explore the question, what is changing right now? And can you let it be? Can you let it change by itself? One element of our practice is this willful re-arriving, coming into the here and now, relaxing, experiencing what's happening in this moment. Another quality is this quality of observing, the open monitoring of what's changing. And a third quality is the quality of allowing, of letting be, or maybe even of surrender. And you might explore in the remaining minute or so what it's like just to truly let things be. How much more could you relax and notice and allow? You may notice how everything changes by itself. What could soften or let go right now? What could soften or let go even more? You might gently now begin to deepen your breath, let your body sway a little bit from side to side. You might, in your own time, let your body move. Feel free to stretch in any way that feels good. Welcome back. We're going to move into an interview that I did with Rachel Krantz. You may recall I did an earlier interview with her for her podcast, an amazing podcast called Help Existing. She's also the author of a book called Open, an uncensored memoir of love, liberation, and non-monogamy. She's an award-winning journalist, a really, really wonderful person, and I think you'll enjoy the following interview. It's from her podcast. It's called Help with Future Thinking. As you know, the mind is always anticipating what's next or reviewing what happened. Very rarely is it here and now. But there are qualities about future thinking that we want to embrace. So this is all about finding balance with future thinking in your life. I hope you find it helpful. Sending you blessings from my home retreat. I'll be thinking of you. And happy trails. I look forward to being with you again soon. Here comes Rachel and me.
So I think, this is a conversation I've been wanting to have with you for a while, actually, because I think this is one of my main sticking points or growth areas, if however you want to put it, of just the habit of the mind being in the future. And I thought maybe we could start out with kind of your broad thoughts on what is going on emotionally, spiritually, when our habit of the mind is to dwell in the future.
Boy, it's such a deep inquiry. Because, of course, as soon as we feel anything resembling anxiety, or fear, we automatically move into self-preservation mode, which means we automatically start scanning for stuff that could kill us. And therein lies therein it all lies. And we hear so much, through all kinds of different traditions talking about our relationship to time. And from what I can tell, it's pretty much be here now. You know, Ram Dass tells this great story of doing some intensive chemical research, and then in like at the peak of his experience, he got it. He absolutely got it. He got the answer to everything, and he scribbled it down and set it aside. And then it was the rest of his journey, and then he slept, and he woke up. He goes, "Oh my God, where's that piece of paper?" And he found the piece of paper on his nightstand, and it said, "Just be." you know and what I find for myself, like all those transcendent moments of clarity, that's always the message. Just be. There's nothing outside of here and now. And yet, of course, we are just in this time matrix thing that really messes with our heads.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really true. And I think, you hear just be, and that's the spiritual message of so many traditions. And, you can be like, yeah, I'm totally on board. And then your mind and body and perhaps trauma response, all kinds of different things at play don't necessarily cooperate. And I've been grappling with this a while. I think making some progress over the years. I do see somewhat how getting older could potentially help a little bit. Do you find that's true in any way? Like, do you find that future thinking is something that the young tend to do more of because they have this idea that life is all ahead of them, while, you know, people who are getting older are better at just existing where they are, or maybe they look back more?
It's a really good question I ask myself because I feel like I'm happier in life. But I ask myself, is it because of my practice or is it just because I'm getting older? You know, and I think part of it, like a well-developed prefrontal cortex is sort of that self-soothing. It's the self-soothing that says, "Wait, hey, wait a minute, you've been through this before." Like, and I think that's part of the aging thing, is we realize, like, yeah, I've been through this, or I've been through something like this before, and I've survived. And I think that is a big, big part of it. But what would you say for yourself? I mean, as a practitioner, your sense of anxiety around time and future, how would you say that it's shifted for you?
um I feel like, well, first of all, it is still the tendency of my mind to go to the future. For example, I was meditating before this talk, and the lawnmower outside started being really loud, and that my mind slipped into, okay, when I'm done, when the timer goes off, I'm gonna be away from this noise. So I see how it's very much a function of like, I don't like what's happening right now, and so I'm going to think about a place where I'll feel better or where conditions are otherwise. And then I guess the difference is now that I have the awareness of like, that's what I'm doing. Can I try just being with this instead? Or I can look at it with some humor of like, oh, I bet you're going to tell Jonathan that in a few minutes, aren't you? That's kind of ironic. So I guess there's just more awareness. I would also say, I guess the thing that's been changing with time is more humility potentially is helping. So I feel like um, before my book came out, that I was really in a lot of future thinking, aware of it, but like, everything was focused on this. This is the thing that's going to happen, that's going to change everything. And then, of course, I sort of knew that probably wouldn't be the case. But when that actually happened, of like, okay, something's changed, but really basically I'm still me in more or less the same situation, that there's a humbling to that, that's like, okay, your future fantastical thinking did not come to pass, so maybe this is all there is. Can you just be here?
Wow.
with that.
Yeah. So you named a lot there. The capacity to name it. Like as soon as you recognize future oriented thinking, there's something to say that's 50% of the battle. Sometimes it's just sort of you're liberated just by noticing it. So that's one function. And then I think the other piece is again like the capacity to reflect on past experience and then apply it to now. And sense of humor. Oh my God, is that ever the way out? You
Mhm.
know. But of course, in order to have the sense of humor, you have to have that larger context, to be able to see the humor in it.
Mhm.
And definitely, I mean, the thing about our anticipation of future, whether it's a future that is expanded or a future that's contracted, like we're anticipating expansion or we're anticipating contraction, it is deeply humiliating, I have found, and there is something very profound about, spiritual humiliation,
Yeah.
either to realize, oh my God, this is no way close to what I imagined it would be, how great it would be, or, oh, this wasn't so bad. What was I churning and burning so much for?
Mhm.
So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Mhm.
A lot to do with it.
Spiritual humiliation. I'm going to use that phrase.
Oh my God, yes. And I've really come to like embrace humiliation. Like, wow, this is this is juicy.
Isn't there even a name for? I was just reading about this, and not humiliation, but there's like a word in Sanskrit for basically that, which like throws us off course, but then like helps us wake up to kind of reframe it as.
Different traditions they talk about the trickster, like this sort of like fools you into this and that. But they are the wake up calls, the psychic 2x4 to the side of the head saying wake up, you know. But what's really, there's a very interesting TED talk by Tim Ferriss called Plan for Your Fears or something like that.
Hmm.
It's so good and it so helps me because my natural inclination is toward anxiety, and again, it's in part of it is it's a desire for control. I just want to I want to be in control of things. So when I was a kid, I would imagine the worst thing that could happen and then play it out in my head. And then if it didn't happen, well, at least I was prepared for the worst. I mean, that was a little bit of how my little young brain worked. And so, and I'm not going to do the TED Talk justice. It's really worth checking out. But it's basically when your mind hallucinates something could go wrong, it could go wrong. There's an element of reality there, and that is that function of our mind that's scanning for the stuff that could kill you, and some of it's total fabrication, some of it's real. But then when you name an anxiety, and then you can ask yourself, what can I do to prevent it? It kicks in a different part of the brain. When I was anticipating a presentation I had to give, and like, oh, it's going to go off, or I'm not going to be there on time, or I'm going to freeze up. And I realized all the things I could do to prevent that from happening, to be well prepared, to be there early, make sure I know the route, check in with any questions I have. It's like, oh, wow, there are actually things I can do toward that anxiety. And then the second question is, what can I do to recover if it happens? And that was a really interesting one too. Like, oh, you know what? Instead of like freezing and the world melting, I can pause, I can make a joke, I can, that sort of thing. And I find just those questions to be so powerful for soothing my anxiety, which is mostly future related, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, that's great advice, and I can see how that helps. At the same time, that's also future thinking, right? And kind of the form that mind tends to take is also anxiety and worry, but kind of what you were describing, that sort of thinking a few steps ahead. What could I do to mitigate this? What will I do to, help myself if it doesn't go the way I want? So exactly what you were just describing, but maybe that's a productive kind of future thinking. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you're actually investigating the phenomena of the anxiety. And what I find is if the fears that are not named are like gnats, they're just like swirling around. But when I can name them, there's something about naming them, like writing down, okay, what am I afraid of about this particular thing? When I write it down, there's something calming about just recognizing the landscape of my anxiety. And then, what can I do to prevent it? That brings up kind of another creative part of my capacity to sense how to be with it. How can I correct it if it happens? And what that does is actually allows me to relax into the moment.
Mm.
It actually, by investigating the anxiety and investigating the fear, naming it, exploring my options, somehow for me, it's like, oh, okay. If that's handled, then I can access the moment, which is where all the creativity comes from, where the presence comes from, where charisma comes from, all of that. Um, it's an interesting exercise.
So writing it down, it sounds like is a good way to do that. Do you have other, do you sort of sit and decide to like meditate on the scenario? I'm wondering if people want to try to, I don't know, compartmentalize their future thinking or bring more intention to it. I've heard that as a method sometimes of like set aside 15 minutes to think about the thing that your mind keeps circling on, and then you're gonna say, "I'm done for the day." Like this is the yeah. Are there any
Yeah,
methods
well,
that you
so
use?
there's another favorite exercise that I do, which I've shared about in the past. But I think one of them is when there's an anxiety, name it, give it a name, write it down, and then what can I creatively do to prevent it? What can I creatively do to correct if it happens? That's one exercise that helps me to soothe my anxiety and help me kind of get back into flow. But then the next thing that I do, and again, this just works for me. I don't know if it would work for anyone else, but I remember once I had a really challenging phone call. It was someone that I was managing, and I was trying to get this project moving forward, and this person was blocking me, like just resisting me, either passively or aggressively. And I had to have a phone call with this person, and she's really, really smart, really, really bright person. And I was really anticipating, warfare, because I was loaded for bear. I wanted to, she was this obstruction in my life. And then somehow I just thought, let me just pause and reflect here. And I thought about the future. I thought about the outcome. And I thought, how do I want to feel at the end of this phone call? And I thought, well, I want to feel respected. I want to feel listened to. And I want to feel a sense of harmony, and excitement about moving forward. And then part of this practice is you really feel it. Like, can you get access to the kinesthetic feeling of it? And then imagine that future self kind of looking back on now, wrapped up and anxious about the call. And then to kind of sense, well, what advice does this future self have to offer me? And then there are three questions to ask. One is, what attitude adjustment would be required? And I thought pretty much instantly, oh, if I want to be respected, I might have to show some respect. If I want to be listened to, maybe I should do some listening.
Mm.
And if I want to feel excited about the future, well, maybe I should tune in as to where there's going to be some connection, where we actually might move forward in a harmonious way. So attitude. The second one is, what behaviors would support that future outcome? I thought, okay, well, I need to ask questions, but I need to ask clarifying questions. And I have to really be interested. And to really, so this person feels listened to as I want to feel listened to. Well, then I'm just going to mirror back what she says to let her know that I'm really listening, and to really ask her what she's excited about. So those are the behaviors. The third thing is, what support would I need? I thought, I'm going to have to breathe, so I put a little sticky on my screen saying breathe. And also, I need to be able to pause. if I feel like I'm going off the rails, give myself permission to pause.
Mm.
So when I went into that call, it just turned out to be this love fest, because I was aligned with how I wanted the outcome to be. And it turned out that she was incredibly bright and she was an incredible collaborator. And we went on to do all kinds of projects and all kinds of work together. So I love that story because it's a very powerful way to sort of sense the future. And then this brings up a whole other question, which is a really, really big one. And it has to do with space, the time space continuum. A good friend of mine is working on a book right now on this. And a lot of the research is really suggesting, and when you look at quantum physics, we tend to think of ourselves as moving from the past toward the future. We're a product of our past, and we are kind of moving toward the future. But what the science suggests is that the future has equal weight on us as the past. So you can think of it as we're being kind of pulled into the future. And that just melts my brain, when I really think about it. What if, your future is actually calling you? And one of the ways it's suggested, and I think this is really cool, look at the things that you're doing now that enliven you. Look at the things now that are just kind of lighting you up and expanding you. If you keep doing those things, they're going to get bigger. And so part of what this suggests for me is just to keep looking for what is most enlivening. And chances are that is your future calling you.
Mm.
I'm going to put the choke chain on myself.
No,
now.
That's great. And that really resonates for me because so many of the decisions and choices that moved me in certain directions in my life, there was that sense of kind of something is calling me here and I just need to listen to it. And so I think that gets it like sort of how it's we maybe I'm framing it wrong. Maybe I'm not caught in future thinking, but I just need to I don't know, get more skillful at listening to it and tuning out parts of it that aren't useful. I mean, I think the reason that this is a habit of mind, besides anxiety, besides wanting to make myself safe, is because it's generally worked, like it's generally brought me in good directions in the path of my life. And so there's a desire to keep listening to the what ifs or letting myself fantasize and imagine because that brings me to new ideas of new possibilities. So that is true at the same time as there's the continual lesson or realization of if I am constantly, listening to those messages from the universe or whatever you want to put it, those messages from the future or trying to think about what is the next future step, I'm missing my life, even if does feel like it is, was correct to listen to. So I think there's that tension of like, on the one hand, there's a lot of wisdom in the sensing that future. And on the other hand, there's this feeling of when I sit and I watch the pattern of my mind, the habit of my mind, I can see how it's overdeveloped.
Right.
Yeah. So there's that tension. I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, 60,000 thoughts a day. How many of them are like direct messages from the future out of 60,000? How do we discern that? And to my mind, it's only through like the settling of the caffeinated chipmunk of the mind that we can begin to kind of sense the what's really calling us. But you just wrote this amazing book, and you must have put at least 40 or 50 hours into it.
Oh my God.
How many years?
I mean, I'd say like 3 years, probably.
3 years.
Yeah.
3 years. When did you first sense, I'm going to write this book?
when I was still living the story of it. So I guess like 7 years ago.
So like 7 years ago, and you're really in this, you're deep, deep into the story of it. And then here's this glimmer that says, I'm going to write a book about this. How did you discern that the difference between just another thought and something that was going to be a 3-year dedicated
Hmm.
part of your life?
Um, I guess by the fact that it didn't go away and grew stronger. Um, and I guess, kind of what I did initially was like, oh, I don't think I would do that. I think this is just a coping mechanism for the fact that my life has gotten so chaotic. But in case, I'm journaling anyway, I'm going to start bringing that mind to like, this is a possibility. There was this sense
Mhm.
of there was, and I liked how you talked about the future self because I've found, um, I think through you and Tara, like meditations, guided meditations on that, contacting your future self, really helpful because you can sort of lean in and ask them, if you want to think of it, future self, higher self, whatever, most awakened self, whatever, what should I be doing? And so I guess when I um, would contact that in whatever way, she would kind of say, "Yep, just keep living. You're gonna be confused for a while, but you're on a path that's going to have a purpose, and just keep bringing an awareness, like staying as present as you can, and also being that observer and taking notes and bring that kind of discipline to it."
Yeah.
So I guess I just kept doing what that intuition told me.
So that brings up something really interesting. And allegedly, the Buddha said, finding your dharma is your dharma.
Mm.
Like finding your path is your path. But also, allegedly, and this is my definition of dharma, your path, just my words, but your path is what you can't not do. And for whatever reason, from that glimmer of a thought, you couldn't not do it. And it wasn't like this passive, you're just going to passively let it happen. You knew that you were going to be sweating blood on this project. Like you knew you were going to be going through, kind of like your own hero's journey in getting this book out. So it wasn't like this, oh, here's this passive thing and it's going to be really, really fun. It was like, no, here's this thing that I'm being called to do. And what my friend Michael would say is your audience, your future audience was calling you to do that,
Mm.
to write your book.
I did have a sense of the future imaginary reader now that you say that, and they were sort of, I mean, I think that I thought of it at the time as both true and also a real emotional coping mechanism of saying, okay, as I'm in the depths of increasing, dysfunction and just confusion and even emotional abuse, that there was kind of this future imaginary reader that was saying, no, like this, you got this, I'm interested in this, I need you to come through the other side so you can tell me in the future how to do it. And so yeah, and then to get those messages, it feels like, of people saying that it came to fruition. And I don't think it's fate necessarily or that it was written, but it is that interesting combination of, it was both a choice and there was something I was tapping into in that space-time continuum that was perhaps, yeah,
Yeah,
waiting.
choiceless choice. I think of it as choiceless choice. Yeah, you got plenty of choices, but not really. Not if you really, really get still. You didn't have a choice on this project.
Mhm.
So whether time symmetry is true or not, and again, it bends my brain to try to really wrap my brain around it. It's a very interesting concept, that we're called, our future is calling us like we're being called toward our future. And kind of what that says to me is the more that we can calm the mind, the more we will feel, not only feel less pain, but we'll have more of that sense of flow, like kind of flowing toward our future.
Yeah, I love that. And just a practice that's been helping me a little bit lately that people have recommended for years that I had, some resistance to, but I've done sporadically is morning pages, Julia Cameron, the artist's way. That's her whole method of basically meditative writing. The idea is that you journal 3 pages of your stream of consciousness every morning, ideally before you do anything else. I don't usually get around to it before anything else, but I try to do it in the morning. And you just kind of dump it out. And I've found two things that one, it's just very instructive to see it reflected on the page of like, okay, let that future thinking exhaust itself a little or that anxiety. I'll sometimes laugh at how quickly the word need shows up, like how much, and see, can I go a whole time, if my mind is more settled, I'll notice like the word need or should might not come up. But if I'm feeling pretty anxious about the to-do list or, real stresses going on in my family or life, that word will pop up a lot. And then I've noticed that if I follow that with meditation, that it's easier for the sit to be more settled, right? Because I've already run through some of that anxiety, some of that future thinking. So I've found that lately to be a nice pairing, the meditative writing, then followed by meditation, and just see the contrast of, is your mind able to relax more?
And that's such a great practice because you're kind of exercising the mind, you know. You're letting it free, you're letting it share freely, and unrestricted, which can result in that you're more available for more subtle presencing.
Mm.
The other practice that I do is something Dr. Eugene Genlin created from the tradition of focusing, called clearing the space. And I'll do it internally. If I wake up in the morning and I just have that low grade anxiety, kind of like a low grade fever, but I don't really know what it is. It's just an inquiry process where you can ask yourself, so what's between me and feeling happy? Or what's between me and feeling good? Or what's between me and feeling free? And you just name one thing, and then you kind of put it to the side. And when you're ready, you ask again. You just name one thing. So I'll just kind of wake up and like, so what's between me and feeling really good inside? Oh, I got that phone call I gotta make later today, and I'm not looking forward to it. You kind of say hello to it. And then imagine you just putting the concern for that to the side. And then again, what's between me and feeling really good inside? I got to make sure I hydrate. I didn't drink enough yesterday, and name that, put the concern for the side, place that to the side. And then you just kind of continue. And sometimes is there a sense of like, wow, other than these 15 things, I'm actually starting to feel pretty good inside. Sometimes an endless laundry list. But what I find is I get a sense of the landscape. Oh, wow. So here are the 6 things that are between me and feeling free. And sometimes just by naming them, you just name it, they kind of lose their potency. Sometimes you name them and you realize there's a real grip, like, oof, yeah, that was under the surface. I didn't know about that one. But now that I know about it, let me note that. And sometimes there can be trauma in sort of naming what's there. But again, it's just another way of sort of like that gross sort of clearing away of the natural anxious quality of mind that can kind of prepare us for like subtler aspects of meditation.
Mm. I love that. Thank you for reminding me about that practice.
That's such a juicy practice.
I
Yeah.
like the idea of doing it before you even get out of bed too. Almost like a body scan, but like a mind scan, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It is like a mind scan. And it's really helpful when I feel like, you know what? I'm anxious, but I don't know why. And it does, because so much of our anxiety it's all the unseen, unfelt, undigested stuff. And it's just a way of slowing down and, moving that line between what you're aware of and what you're not aware of a little bit
Mm.
can be super helpful. And so much of it is around accessing the moment. And I find when I can name it, I imagine like when you do morning pages and you sort of like let the mind off gas, then you're in the moment. And part of the whole idea of the moment, at least in the Buddhist tradition, is, the shamatha is actually calming. You know, concentration is calming. So when we're really present, there really is that sense of kind of opening into a spaciousness of presence, which is pretty juicy.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I was just thinking that there's also obviously so much of it. I feel like our conversations come back to an awareness of impermanence as well. Just thinking in my life recently, I've had my uncle who I'm very close to has been sick for many years now, and recently it's gotten accelerated in terms of his dementia and deterioration, and he's in and out of the hospital every few weeks, and there's a lot of stresses with just because he doesn't have money trying to access social services, and I'm his main caregiver. And I noticed at first when it started really declining, maybe, I don't know, 5 months ago, kind of took a rapid turn, that there was such a bracing and anxiety and also grief. Um, but that once I let myself feel some of the grief and really just like spend some time crying rather than bracing myself against it. And I think once I started realizing, oh, this is like, it's not going to get better. It's just going to be different day to day. There's going to be days that are easier and days that are harder. Once I sort of started realizing that, not to say I never get anxious about it or caught in future thinking, but I have found some acceptance and also a lot of, yeah, wisdom in it, a lot of opportunity to practice in terms of touching that impermanence daily, in terms of not just his life, but just how he's doing, that it changes so much, or even how much of his mind is there can be so different day to day. And that there's something about, yeah, touching that impermanence more consistently, grieving it, witnessing it, having a lack of control over it. I find when I'm most in touch with that, that the future thinking or the anxiety will settle a little bit. Um, and sometimes there's even more of that ability, like you were talking about, that to touch the now and the poignancy of, wow, this is all slipping away. Like for me too, this is true for me too. I might not be where he is yet, but you know, it's all just as impermanent for me. And that, of course, being connected with that is key to perhaps staying more present and grounded. So yeah, I was curious about your thoughts of future thinking as perhaps a form of terror management, often a way of avoiding thinking about our own impermanence, because if we can just think that once we get all our ducks in a row, we're going to be okay, then we maybe deny death or
It's so
aging.
true. So well said. It was Mark Twain who said the worst things in my life never actually happened.
Hmm.
You know, we just live in this anxious place. And, a good friend of mine, who's a federal prosecutor here in DC, um, he said to me one day, he said, two things changed my life. I said, really? What's that? He said, mindfulness and improv. And I really got it. I really got it, and improv, like the embrace of improv, has been a really powerful metaphor for me. Um, Whenever I would give talks, I would always plan on having some time for Q&A. And I realized I never had time for Q&A, you know, um, because I had the anxiety around, well, what if I don't know the answer and all that kind of stuff. And then when I really embraced, what improv means, which is basically whatever happens, you say yes and you do a build. Whatever happens, it's yes and. Suddenly it just kind of opened up as this creative process. And just as in our conversation, we don't have this mapped out too tight. I have no idea what you're going to say next. But when I practice that yes and, like, just to embrace the flow, and then how can I build on that flow, I'm having a lot of fun. And when my father was in Alzheimer's unit, and his mind, it's the invasion of the body snatchers. It's
Mm.
just horrific. But I remember very, very clearly feeling very anxious around how am I supposed to show up, you know? And then I asked myself, well, what does he need? And then I realized he just needs company. That's what he wants. He just wants company. And that really shifted things for me. And also realizing, like, it's way out of control whether he knows my name, whether he recognizes my face, or whether he's kind of in another world. I have no control over that. But what I do have control over is, to some degree, I think, is how I respond.
Mm.
And so that has been a really, really helpful one for me. And the other one for me too, around anxiety and the future, is realizing that when I'm churning on something, that a lot of times I don't have enough information to make a decision. And just that realization has been really helpful for me, of like, you know what? I don't have enough information to make this decision. So I'm just going to postpone being a churning urn of burning funk around this particular issue.
I love that, and I actually have been returning to that advice of yours since our last conversation, that people can look up of help figuring out the most important thing. And yeah, that was some of your advice there too. Of exactly, maybe you just don't have enough information. Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah, I just keep coming back to that, because this feeble mind is trying to control so many elements that are really beyond our control. And while that can be terrifying, it can also be liberating.
Hmm.
You could say that a mystic, what has been said, that a mystic is someone who floats on the water in which a fearful person will drown. It's our capacity to really hold the incredible paradox and the mystery of what it even means to be alive.
Hmm. Yeah, you're reminding me of that is actually a quote of yours in the book, because that really stuck with me, and also just that tension of there's so many things in life where you can feel yourself increasingly able to swim at the same time as you sense maybe you're drowning, and just how, yeah, it's a useful image, but it's like sometimes both those things can be true at once, or this learning to swim requires some drowning or something. So,
Yeah,
but it's,
yeah, it's definitely a complex process.
yeah. I want to be sure I get to. So we've talked about the sort of future thinking that can really be unpacked and rich with information about your path in life, about what you're anxious about. But a lot of future thinking that's habitual is quite mundane. Like I'll be like, what am I gonna have for lunch? After this walk, what am I gonna, it's like really chatter, or seeking pleasure. And I know you and I are both kind of like seekers, and that we've talked about before that there's a lot of desire there sometimes for new experience, for yeah, all of that, and that the flip side of that can be perhaps a lot of anxiety or future thinking. um, so I guess I'm wondering, when we catch ourselves habitually just in that kind of, yeah, just chatter sort of, there's maybe not so, it doesn't feel like there's much of a teaching to the future thinking, but it's more just a habit of the mind that we want to work on not reinforcing as much, so that when we're on a walk, we can be on a walk, or when we're sitting, we can be sitting, and not planning what we're going to do in the 10 minutes after that might
Yeah.
be more stimulating or pleasurable. How do you work with that sort of future thinking?
Yeah, boy. Well, that whole process of constant and never-ending self-improvement,
Yeah.
that's just a reflex of the mind. Not for everyone, But for some people, it's a very, very deep reflex, constant and never ending self improvement, which has two sides. One side of the coin is, well, what a wonderful aspirational thing. The other side of the coin is, well, what's wrong with now? you know, and so that's something I really work with a lot for myself, because, I've always been sort of spiritually ambitious, which is a paradox unto itself, you know. And I remember once I watched this process in my mind. It was a meditation. I was reading these non-dual teachers, and I thought, okay, that's it. I think, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do nothing and just let my life flow out of pure presence and just completely surrender, and then write a best-selling book about it.
Oh God, are we the same person?
No, God, it's like, please let me out of this mind. You know, there's Michael Singer wrote the book The Untethered Soul, which you may have looked at, and um, and he's a very, very strong advocate for don't touch life.
Hmm.
Don't touch life. Let life flow through you. There's some pretty deep flaws, I think, in his message. But basically there's a very powerful element there. Like, you know, what if we didn't push? Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, he used to this great line where he would say that as your consciousness evolves, you accomplish more by doing less.
Hmm.
And Abraham Lincoln, give me, if I have 5 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend 4 hours, sharpening the axe. It's that element of the more we slow down, the more we see, and the more we may be able to make decisions that are more alignment with the laws of reality, as opposed to, the quicksilver nature of the mind. So I find that to be a very interesting thing to explore. And I do notice, and it's not easy for me, but the more I slow down, the clearer I tend to think, and the more genuine my intuitions might be, because they're not coming from my head. They start to come more from really the felt sense, the kinesthetic sense of, yeah, that just feels right. I feel that in my bones. This is something that I really need to do.
Hmm.
So I think the antidote to it is challenging, because we really do need to learn how to calm. We really do need to learn how to disidentify from the the drunken chipmunk of the mind. And the more we can do that, the more genuine our impulses will be, I think.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Like to just keep working on slowing down is kind of potentially the antidote. I mean, I'm wondering if there's any phrases you ever say for yourself, because I know, sometimes you've talked about mental noting or labeling, and I tend to usually find that a helpful method for kind of trying to rewire uh, deeply embedded habitual things of, just having those different phrases in my pocket where I can label what's happening or perhaps redirect what's happening. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas of, if I'm sitting and I find I'm planning what I'm going to have for lunch, I know I could label it future thinking and come back, but are there any other ideas of phrases that come to mind to help bring you back?
Yeah, well, it's not a phrase, with more of a line, but I found it to be really helpful. That life is too short to be in a hurry.
Mm.
That one's pretty juicy.
Mm.
But I think part of it is, I really do think there's this kind of bifurcation between the impulse that comes from fear and the impulse that comes from creativity and love. And sometimes I find, if I can begin to kind of, and this only works when my mind gets really, really quiet, you know, and I can begin to tune into like the feeling tone of my body. In Buddhism, it's referred to as Vedana, and they're basically three feeling tones. And one is sort of expansive and pleasant, and one is contracting, and we call that negative. And then there's the in between, the neutral. When I can, and it's not all the time, when I can begin to kind of sense how if there's a thought and it goes into the future, it might have a contracting quality to it. And when I can just sort of see that, and I can just sort of name the contraction, sometimes that will help me to kind of disidentify from it a little bit,
Mm.
you know. So it's not so much a labeling, it's sort of transcendent to labeling. And sometimes I just sort of, I can name fear. I'm just trying to really break it down. Like what's the essence of it? It's fear, anxiety is fear. It's, you know, um, but if I can get underneath that and kind of feel that, like the feeling tone of contraction, the feeling tone of fear, the feeling tone of anxiety, it's almost like I'm meeting it energetically before it flowers into, thoughts, beliefs, habits, character, and destiny.
Yeah, I like that you could get familiar with it on a body level too, and try to locate it, or just kind of a little bit have tea with it, rather than pushing it away or saying no, bad future thing, and be like, okay, this is really present today as I sit. Let me get curious about it. Seems like another
Yeah.
method.
Sometimes naming it is enough. Like some things are self-liberating as soon as you name it. And then sometimes they're stickier. Sometimes like bringing your hand to your heart can be a wonderful way of resourcing and bringing a little bit of empathy into it. And then sometimes it might be worthy to really sit down and have tea with it, really investigate it. And cognitively, I kind of love that process from Tim Ferriss. So like, okay, so what is this fear? What exactly am I afraid of? To really see it. And then cognitively you can ask like, wow, okay, so what do I have control over around preventing it? And then if it were to happen, how can I self-correct? So that's cognitive. But the other way of working with it, of course, as you know, is working with it somatically, to really sense where you feel it and to locate it, and then to sense if you can bring some empathy and compassion to that feeling. And that can be just a beautiful way of kind of soothing that fear in a way that's kind of below the level of the mind sometimes.
Yeah, I like that. And yeah, I think just one of the main takeaways that I already realized, but that we're just keep coming back to is, behind the future thinking is often a deep sense of fear. And so, probably, um, rather than sometimes how I've been framing it as this future thinking is this thing I don't like about myself, and I'm going to try to, stomp it out somewhat whenever, or redirect whenever I see it, that I have to remember to bring that element of compassion, or perhaps even recognizing where the future thinking stems from the scared inner child,
Mm-hmm.
and like perhaps personifying it that way could be helpful for me sometimes too, of just like, oh, like little Rachel's really scared right now. It's like she's having to gather all her nuts and hide them, everywhere
Yeah.
to continue with the chipmunk thing. And
Yeah.
just to kind of bring that compassion to it might be an important piece that I've been forgetting sometimes. I mean, I think I bring a lot of self-compassion, but as it relates to the future thinking, when I'm sitting and I'm planning what I'm going to do afterwards, I just tend to be quite frustrated with that tendency, and not bringing compassion enough.
Yeah, oh, and it's such a powerful mirror of the mind, the three poisons, if you will, of the mind. Future thinking can go from greed, just
Mhm.
desire. It's the, ooh, I can do this. Oh, I've never done that. The gathering of experiences, the inflation, of the ego just becomes this incredible, display of the ego, unrestricted, And then there's the future thinking that comes from aversion, which is out of fear, it's out of judgment, out of blame, it's out of self-protection. And then there's the future thing that comes out of delusion, which is just having thoughts that are future based that have absolutely nothing to do with reality. So I think identifying those three flavors can be really interesting, but then it's really interesting to think, so then who am I without desire? Who am I without aversion or hatred? And who am I clear seeing? And I think that's what kind of sets the stage for kind of like the organic, wholesome information to arise sometimes.
Mm, I love that. Thank you. I think that I've run through most of my questions. I'm sure I could keep talking about this for many days. But is there anything else I haven't asked or that you haven't had a chance to say about this yet?
Well, maybe sometime in the future we can we'll continue the conversation.
I hope so. Thank you so much.
What I keep coming back to is this whole concept that there's nothing outside of now. And when I meditate on that, it's a very powerful experience. When you realize mind will go to the future, mind will go to the past. Presence is only in the here and now. And so that's where all these practices, they really take us to a mystical place inside. Or they have the potential to guide us to a very, very still place inside that can be quite magical. And that's where I want to keep investing, because I just know for myself that what comes out of that place of presence is usually compelling stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jonathan. As always, it's been a real pleasure and privilege to talk with you.
Well, it's always so much fun to hang out, and I just love the fire and the passion in your practice and in your life, and I love that you're really making this available for so many others.
Thank you so much.